she's become the voice for a generation. And mainly when I say voice, I mean her singing voice. But I'm here to tell you, this is a woman who has some serious wisdom on her for her young years. I can't wait for you to hear today from my guest, Jamie Grace. I'm Julie Lyles Carr. This is the Modern Motherhood Podcast from All Mom Does. And this is a conversation that had me laughing, had me pondering, had me thinking. And I particularly want you to listen to the really interesting love story between Jamie Grace and her husband. You're going to find it really fascinating. So today I welcome Jamie Grace. Thanks so much for being with me today. And I'm so excited for listeners to get to know more about you. I'm sure they know all about your music. But before we get there, tell us who you are, where you're living, who you're married to, all the things.
Yeah, so my name's Jamie Grace. I sing songs for a living, and I live on the West Coast. I'm slap dab in the middle of Los Angeles County and San Diego County, or of LA and San Diego. And I love it. I live here with my husband. His name's Aaron. We've been married a little over a year and a half. And about 3-4 months into being married, we were like, let's have a baby. And so, so we have a 5-month-old named Isabella. And I'm also neighbors with my parents and my sister, who is also married and also has a 5-month-old. Not planned. It just happened that way.
Wow.
I don't know. I feel really cool that I'm on a podcast about motherhood because, talk about a goal. I've wanted to be a mom for a really long time. So I'm really honored to be here.
Well, we're so glad to have you. And that sweet baby, I've been looking at pictures of her. She is just gorgeous. Isabella Brave. Do I have that right? Is that her name?
You do. Yeah.
Beautiful. Yeah. I love names like
that.
So,
thank you. I'm Southern. So Jamie Grace is my first and middle. She has 2 middle names because she has my maiden name in there. So she's Isabella Brave Harper. But it's just one of those Georgia things. I gave the girl so many names and now I don't know what to call her. And so mostly I go with Bell Bell, or Bug, which is, I think, accidentally from This Is Us. But yeah, so I call her 8,000 things.
We have done the same thing. We've got 8 kids and all 8 of them.
Oh my gosh, goals. Yeah. That is the goal. I'm not joking.
Goals are cautionary tale. You tell me, Jamie Grace, but all of mine except for one have the 4-name thing going on because I'm Southern by heritage also, Mississippi,
yes.
Alabama. And so we've got McKenna Jane and we've got Mason Lee and we've got Mercy Genevieve. Same thing. And so we have the same issue at our house, a million different nicknames. And you got to be in the fam to know exactly who you're referring to because some of these names make no sense whatsoever.
It's good though. It's a good safety thing for your kids. They can always mix it up as they get older.
That's right. Awesome. That's right. That was part of our thought. Well, if you don't like the one we're calling you by, you've got more to choose from.
Exactly.
So take us back when you first began to realize that you had a gift for music. Was that something that you just feel like you've always known? Was it something that started to emerge at a certain point in your childhood?
Thank you, by the way. It definitely started at an early age. My mom has been a singer. My dad's both my parents are pastors, but growing up, my dad was a pastor, my mom was a singer, and my mom actually stopped traveling in music. She was playing, singing at local churches here and there in the Southeast region. And we grew up in Georgia, and she stopped doing that when my sister and I were coming of age because she wanted to be a homeschool mom. And my dad was working, and so she needed to be able to be home with us. But I do still remember her singing at local churches, and she would oftentimes, I remember she was recording a tape once. And so I got to go to the tape recording. Ooh. And that was just so much fun. Just I was so in love with that. And I would sing in church. So for music has definitely been ever since I was little. And it just keeps growing.
That's awesome. What was the first time that you sang publicly that you can remember?
Oh man, it was Babby Mason stopped by the church sometime. I love Southern gospel. And my second solo was Janet Paschal's Born Again on top of Stone Mountain in Stone Mountain, Georgia. And, it sounds like a sad story, but I'm going to tell it real quick because it's actually a beautiful story. But, back in the days of the KKK, the Stone Mountain was oftentimes where they would burn crosses. And so they started to have these Easter sunrise services on top of Stone Mountain, and Black people were not invited to them. And eventually Black people were invited, but they had to sit in the back. And eventually they were allowed to sit wherever they wanted, but they certainly weren't going to preach. It was led by only white people. And so my father was the very first Black man to ever preach on top of Stone Mountain. And I was the very first Black person to ever sing during that service. And I was only about 7 years old. So I definitely remember that, because it was just a huge moment for our town, a huge moment for Georgia. And my mom was the first Black woman to ever preach. So it's crazy just what God did. So from an early age, I knew that music was more than just melodies and songs. I knew that it was about changing the world. And so that was really cool to be a part of that.
That's amazing. And I want to give a little bit of context here. That was just 20 years ago, Jamie Grace. Let's just soak on that for a second. It was only 20 years ago that historic moment happened. And I think at times we think we've progressed a lot in this country when it comes to diversity, when it comes to getting over some scars and wounds that this country has. And then I hear a timeline like that, and I think, wow. That was not that long ago. That was...
Yeah, it's crazy. 5-6 years ago, I played a show in a certain town that was a sundown town, which, sundown town means that once the sun is down, people of color are not allowed to be out. And I played a show in a sundown town, and my picture of a colleague who's also Black was in the magazine, or the newspaper, with all of our names listed, essentially letting everyone know that we were allowed to be out after sundown. Because we were performing, and that hit in a way that was like, guys,
come on,
guys, it's 2015, but there's a lot of beauty in the world, but there's a lot of brokenness too, and that's one of the main reasons why I do create, is because I'm like, if I can reach the people that are broken, if I can be, I'm broken too, obviously, but we're all broken. It's just all about doing what God has called us to do, to reach the broken people, and hopefully other people are doing their part so that we are reached as well.
And I think that's where this whole element of creativity, of music, of storytelling, all of it can have such power. You're right. It's so much bigger than just the creative moment itself, because it can take you to places, it can open doors, it can put you in front of people who maybe you wouldn't have had an opportunity to communicate and interact with before. And so it's incredible how those doors do open.
No,
so
definitely.
Tell me about Aaron, because you guys had an unusual romance. You had an unusual trip to the altar, at least in today's culture. So tell listeners how y'all met and how the decision to get married came about.
Yeah, I met my husband in the autograph line of one of my shows. I've been very publicly single. Everybody that had ever heard my name pretty much would either say like, oh, she sings happy songs, or oh, she's the one that keeps talking about how single she is. And I was very content in my singlehood, but I simultaneously really desired to be a wife, and really desired to fall in love. And so when I would play shows, it was very often that people would bring their sons or their brothers to my show and be like, what about him? What about him? And it made me very uncomfortable, but it was also one of the funniest and most amazing things in the world, because it's just
everybody was shopping for you. Yeah, you had a whole bunch of matchmakers.
Yeah, and I'm like, can I be mad? No, like I should be grateful, but it never worked out. It was just always like literally just like funny, and I was like, oh, thanks guys, but like that's not really how it's gonna work. I'm at work right now, like I can't do that. But yeah, it was November 2016, and my husband came through the autograph line, and my sister Morgan and we had been performing the show together. And so I saw him, and I literally looked at her and I said, I love him, and I'm going to marry him. And then we got up from the table and went and met them. He was with a big group, and they were at the end. So we, got up and took pictures and got to know them and stuff. And ironically, we lost touch that night. I didn't get his name. We didn't really interact for long. But I knew that his church was very connected with the church where we sang, and the church where we sang, we kept in touch with the young adult pastor. And so a year later, I just randomly stumbled upon him on Instagram, which randomly stumbled upon means that I went searching for his Instagram one day, and I found it. And even though I'm all about women dropping the handkerchief, letting a guy know you're interested, especially in my situation, it's like I had to at least say hi. I have to say something. You can't just hide in your basement and expect, men to come find you. If they do, that's creepy. But I I was like, let me drop the handkerchief. Let me just follow him. Let him know that I at least see him. But then from there, it was all him, all pursuing me. He sent me a message, and that was only November 2017. And so by January 2018, we had been talking on the phone all day, every day, and FaceTiming all day, every day. And by January 24th, we were engaged. And by April, we were married. And, it was very, to some people, fast and crazy. And, oh my gosh, I could never do that. And I'm like, no, you couldn't, because God did. And, it's a love story that only he could write. So, well, that's where we are now.
That's amazing. And, I think you're right to address. I think there are people who hear stories like that and they almost think it's sort of tacit permission to go have some really fast romance. But the element that you're encouraging is, hey, sometimes those stories can't exist, but to try to force it would be something outside of what you want it to be. Oh, gosh.
Exactly. I mean, it was definitely not something that we could have created. We knew that it was our relationship is us and us only, but we also kept mentors involved, and my parents were very involved in premarital counseling and even choosing to pursue it after marriage to make sure that we got all the stuffs, because we had a faster engagement. And we were like, normally you'd have, way longer premarital counseling. So once we got married, we were like, let's not finish our premarital let's not end our premarital counseling, even though we're already married. Like, let's stay in this so we can learn all the things that we would have learned if we had been engaged longer. So yeah, I mean, it's definitely a very different, unique story. And I don't think it's one that people should try to copy and paste, but I feel that way about everyone's love story. I'm like, God is doing something beautiful with each person, and you can only do what he's called you to do.
Now, you've written about and had interviews with people where you've talked about the experience of letting Aaron know about something that you were identified with in childhood, which is Tourette's syndrome and OCD. How did that conversation unfold? What were his expectations? What were things you wanted him to know about your experience and the way you navigate life?
There was a little bit of him knowing, because I'm a public figure and because he just knew a little bit about my story. I have Tourette's syndrome, OCD, ADHD, and anxiety. But even to that extent, like, there are still things that, obviously, as someone that I was planning to spend the rest of my life with, things that I wanted to share with him that no one knows, and that was terrifying. It was absolutely terrifying. I remember when I was only about 11 or 12 years old, I had just been diagnosed, and a family member who I really admired told me that no man would ever want to marry me because he wouldn't want his children to have that. And I'm not sure why they felt that was wisdom for them to say to a child, but I'm glad they said it, because it helped me. In the moment, I wasn't, of course, but as I got older, I'm glad they said it, because it helped me understand that some people were going to be in my corner and some people weren't. And so them breaking that ability for me to trust them at that young of an age, it showed me that that's just how some people were going to be. And it was nothing but the grace of God that it didn't harden my heart to all people. But it gave me a stronger ability to be able to trust my husband with information like that, knowing that not everyone was going to be able to handle it. And so we talked about it while we were dating. We talked about, or courting as we call it, we talked about it throughout then. But when we were engaged was when we had a longer conversation, which some people would be like, oh my gosh, why didn't you talk to him that before you got engaged? Like, did you try to get the ring so he couldn't walk away? It wasn't so much that. It was just it was hard for me. Like, some of my friends have never even seen me tick. They've never even seen me have a panic attack. So sitting down with someone and telling them every little detail was terrifying. And also one of the most freeing experiences of my life, because he was asking questions and he was just so curious and interested. And we still have those conversations as we're married, as I'm learning so much more about it, even still. So motherhood has taught me more about it. Marriage taught me more about it. And we just try to keep that conversation
So define
open.
for my readers what Tourette is and what the process to you being identified as a child was. What were the markers that began to show up?
Yeah, so Tourette syndrome is a neurological condition causing tics, which are uncontrollable movements and sounds. And so it started with, just some arm and leg kind of twitching, jerking movements for me, and some blinking that just seemed very repetitive and uncontrollable. And so, things were very different back in my day than they are now. And so it actually took my mom doing the research. But I just recommend, if any parent notices any inconsistencies with their child, or if their child is saying, this hurts, or I can't help this, I can't stop this, or I feel stressed, or I have to organize it this way, I have to do that. So many things are just kids being unique kids, and when we embrace those things, they become unique and incredible adults. But sometimes when those symptoms are persistent for months at a time or years at a time, or it can become physically harmful, then I recommend starting with a counselor school counselor or a therapist or something like that. And then also a primary care doctor, and just kind of sharing those details with them and seeing if it, needs to move toward a neurologist or something like that.
So talk to me about the lifestyle you have, also while knowing and being identified as having Tourette's syndrome, OCD, ADHD, anxiety issues. Girl, you're on the road all the time. I mean, every day is a new day. Things are not consistent. Things do have this craziness to it with life on the road and new venues every night and being around a lot of new people. How have you learned to navigate that in light of your diagnosis?
I actually feel like it's one of the best lifestyles for me, because Tourette syndrome, the essence of it is something that I can't control. So I'm so used to not having control. I'm just like, let's just go on a plane every day. So for me, it feels normal. I don't know if I would feel comfortable in a consistent structure every single day. I think it would be overwhelming because, ever since I was 9 or 10 years old, I've physically had little to no control over my own limbs. And so having little to no control over my schedule is just
another thing.
That makes sense. But even within that, as someone that does have OCD and really thrives in structure and consistency, I just create my own structure within the crazy. If that makes sense, which is literally what I do for my life, and I said this once in a podcast, and someone got really upset with me and sent me an email, and I was like, can't help it. It's just who I am. But I have a bunch of dry erase boards in our house, and a bunch of calendars, and a bunch of structure within the lack of structure in being in the entertainment business. And that's what keeps me grounded. And it is a lot of an OCD thing of needing to have something that is planned and something that makes sense for my brain. And I remember I said that once in a podcast, and somebody was like, please don't make it seem like people with OCD only talk about dry erase boards all the time. And I'm like, well, for me, it's not a fun element of, I've got a dry erase board. But if one of those dry erase boards gets erased, we might be headed to a panic attack. So it is a lot more serious than, just I liked my plan. So I just try to control the things that I can control, which are can I control 4 different shows a week and all of the different delays that I might have with a plane, or, the sound checks that might not be on time. Can I control that? No. But can I control scheduling YouTube videos for the next 4 weeks and exactly all the topics I want to talk about? So it's finding that structure within the things that I can't change that is allowed me to have a lot of freedom.
Absolutely.
If that makes sense.
Now, talk to me about this. I 2 of my children are identified as differently abled, one with a significant hearing loss, one had a stroke at birth. And sometimes when I speak about that, when I'm on the road and speaking, I will have somebody, just like you got an email from somebody who heard a podcast interview and sort of didn't like your answer. Sometimes I'll have somebody say to me, well, you should just be praying bigger for those children, and you should be praying for healing for them, and on and on. I'd love to hear your take on how you marry your faith with this unique way that God has wired you together, and how you find Him in it. Because there are people who really don't accept or don't really quite understand how those of us who are walking out our lives in ways that are differently abled have His peace. So how do you get there?
Man, yeah, this is not me trying to plan your life, but oh my gosh, I'm just I'd like to think that God has given me wisdom, but so much of it comes from my mom. So if you're just ever oh my gosh, I need another person to interview, I just think y'all would just have the most amazing conversation in the world.
I'd love to talk with her. We'll figure that out.
Oh my gosh, because what you just said, because my mom always tells this story of we were at a show 6 years ago. My mom's my manager, so she used to travel with me full time. And she had this one guy come up to her and she was like, you need to be praying for a better testimony for your daughter. And my mom, in the calmest voice, had a solid 2-minute clapback that was just full of scripture and just the consistencies of the Holy Spirit. It was so good. But yeah, I hear that all the time. The thing that's interesting is that anybody that does say those types of things typically can talk about the imperfections of this world, but once it comes to physical health, it just gets weird. And we have to understand that that's just a part of the broken world that we live in. Yes, God can heal. I've seen Him do it. So many of us have seen, we know a cancer survivor, or we know someone who is in a marriage that we're not sure if it would be restored. There are so many things in life that we've seen God do, but we also know about the truth of heaven. We know about the promise of heaven, and we know that heaven is a place of perfection. And I'm not in a place of trying to act like I'm going to live in an earthly world that is going to be exactly like heaven, because I know that heaven is a place of healing. And so whether God chooses to take Tourette away tomorrow, today, or in heaven, I know that he's still going to do what he's going to do. And I need to do what I'm called to do. And that's to live a life that's pleasing to him. And that life will be imperfect. You know, when our daughter was born, or when I was pregnant rather, people would always ask, you want to have a boy? Do you want to have a girl? Do you hope it's twins? And all the conversations that, you know, people say when you're pregnant. And one of the main things that people kept saying was, I just hope you have a healthy baby. I just hope you have a healthy baby. And don't get me wrong, I never want anything bad to happen to my daughter. That is the last thing that I want. When she cries for 2 seconds, if I'm trying to get a little boogie out of her nose, like I'm miserable because I'm like, she's crying. I don't want her to be sad. But at the same time, my husband and I really pray that this comes out okay. I really hope that you can hear my heart on this. My husband and I never prayed for a healthy child. One, because I was not a healthy baby. I have never been to the world standard of healthy. I've never lived that out, whether it was pneumonia, Tourette's syndrome, gastritis, whatever it was. I've never lived a life that was seemingly healthy. But what we prayed over for our child, and this is specifically why we gave her the middle name Brave, we prayed that she would invest her life in courage and joy and peace and love, because whether she's a healthy baby or not, something will happen, whether she's 1 year old, 30 years old, 50 years old, something's going to show up in her life that's going to shake her world. That's going to feel like everything's falling apart. And more than I want her to have physical health, I want her to have the joy of the Lord so deeply rooted in her that she finds it in her darkest places. And more than I want her to be a healthy 15-year-old, I want her to have the bravery and the courage that can only be found in Jesus to know that she will be able to get through it. And so, no, I don't ever want her to be broken. And I know that my parents never wanted me to experience what I experienced. But I think it's so much more than idolizing physical health and understanding that God can do so much in our weakness. Literally, Corinthians says your strength is made perfect in my weakness. So the Bible acknowledges weakness. Right. You know, Psalm 30 verse 5 says, weeping may endure for a night, but joy comes in the morning. The Bible acknowledges weeping. It acknowledges crying. It just says that we'll have joy through it. We'll have God's strength through it. And that's what I pray for, whether my healing from Tourette syndrome comes on this earth or not.
That's fantastic. And I love, and we are going to have to get your mom on. I would love to hear her experiences in that world too, because it is that very interesting combination of the person who's walking through it and the people around them who love them and love them well and are so excited about exactly who they are. So that's fantastic to get to hear how Mama got to get in a word edgewise on that one. That's awesome. We'll get right back to the interview in just a moment. You may have noticed at the top of the show or at the end of the show, I'm always encouraging you to go check out something. It's called All Mom Does. And I just want to make sure that you're taking advantage of this amazing resource for the journey you're on when it comes to your kids, your marriage, your spiritual life, your job, your relationships. All Mom Does is this incredible community of women just like you, walking through so many of the same things. And you can go on allmomdoes.com. You'll find all kinds of fantastic blog posts, great information, but also check out All Mom Does on the socials, because there's such an incredible community that is developed there. Women encouraging women, women sharing their lives. So be sure and check it out. I know you hear it at the top and the end of the show, but it's so important. I had to just stop right here and mention again to you. Go to allmomdoes.com and All Mom Does on Instagram and Facebook. You're going to find friendship, inspiration, and so much more. Now, you and Aaron had a baby. My husband, Mike, and I, our first baby came 15 months into our brand new marriage, and she was a surprise. We didn't have the 4-month, let's have a baby. Yeah. We had a what? So I do know that for us, a lot of our peers who were getting married around the same time, a lot of them waited to have children for quite a while. And I feel like it changed our marriage early on to have a child so early in the marriage. Do you see that for you and Aaron? Or at the same time, it was kind of funny because it was all we really knew. I mean, it was like, yeah, we're married and we have a baby. Yeah. So how has that transition been?
Right, yeah. Somebody asked me the other day, they were like, do you wish that you waited to have a child or something like that? And I was like, I don't know. Yeah. Like, I don't know anything different. You know, this is what worked for us. And we actually had talked about adopting first. And then, you know, this was just kind of became the plan. But yeah, we were just so open to whatever God had for us. And we knew that, because of a lot of my health complications, the timing was good for me in a health way. And we didn't want to take that for granted because we didn't know how long that would last. We just tried to be intentional about our marriage was in a good place. I was in a good place with my health. And so we knew that we wanted to not take that for granted, not knowing if we would get that opportunity again.
So how are you navigating motherhood on the road? How has that been? Because, for a lot of us, new baby, the thought of even trying to get to the grocery store with that new baby is wildly overwhelming. So how are you doing it?
My very gracious husband came off of his normal job, and we travel together full time. And so that's a very significant part of it. And with that, a lot of it is just choosing to accept support, whether that's with my husband or we were at a show a couple weeks ago, and an awesome guy named Blake that goes out and does our merchandise on tour. And the baby was a little fussy and I needed to go and do a photo with something, and my husband was tied up with something else. And for one of the first times, I just looked at Blake and I said, "Can you just hold her?" And he's a great guy, don't get me wrong, but that was so out of character for me. And he was so great with her. It was only for a few minutes, but even on the airplane, there were some flight attendants that just wanted to hold her so bad. And we were so persnickety, we're stranger danger. But, in that moment, I'm sitting there, I'm working on a book, and my husband is barely awake. And for those 15 minutes that they held her and played with her, it was incredible. And so it's just learning to accept support. And if you don't have support, it's going out and seeking that support. It's getting involved in your local church. It's going to mommy groups. It's, calling that friend that's been texting you saying how cute the baby is and saying, "Do you think she's cute at 3 a.m.? Great, I'll see you then." It's just choosing to accept that support. It's hard to do it, but it's worth it.
It really does tap into what I hear from a lot of young moms, feeling very isolated, even if they're having a more typical suburban lifestyle or not on the road.
Right.
And such great wisdom, that place of being willing to accept help from family and in being intentional to create community around yourself. Because I think a lot of times as moms, we do feel lonely, but it's difficult for us to take a step out there and go ahead and go to the moms group or go to the church and get to know some people. We tend to avoid that. So such great wisdom early on from you about how to make sure that you are being intentional to create that community around yourself and to get that help that you need, because momming is, it is a full contact sport for sure.
I love that.
So in the midst of meeting the guy, getting married, having the baby, you've also been quite busy, my friend. You have been working on various projects. You've been doing some stuff with PureFlix. You've been doing all kinds of stuff. So what do you have upcoming in just the next few weeks and then in 2020 that we want to have on our radar?
It's really exciting and crazy. I actually decided I'm not sure when this podcast interview comes out, but if it comes out before Monday, then I'll just share early news. But I'm actually going to be releasing new music every month for a year. So I'm so excited about that because I just get to make music because I love Jesus, because I love people, but also because I love art and I love making art weird and, bringing in my roots of loving Southern gospel and Christian hip hop and all the things. And so I'm really excited about that because it's crazy, because a lot of people can think, as a singer, it's when you're on tour, that is your success. Being at home with a kid, people are like, "Oh, you're different now. You changed," whatever. But for me, this has been the most incredible season. There's nothing more inspiring than being around new life. And there's nothing more inspiring than being home with my husband and just seeing our lives change and shift in the most beautiful way. And so I've gotten to create some music that I'm really proud of, and I'm just excited to share it. And I'm excited for what the new year has to hold.
All right, Jamie Grace, thanks so much for being with me today. So appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem.
Head over to the show notes for links and more content from the episode today. And while you're on the interwebs, be sure and check out All Mom Does, an amazing resource and community for the season of life you're in. Come say hi to me on the socials. I particularly hang out on Instagram, and I'm Julie Lyles Carr there. It's so great to get to connect with you on the grams. I just love it when I get to hear from you about your favorite episodes and what's going on in your life and who you'd like to see as a guest. So head to the grams and say hi. A big thank you to Rebecca, our content coordinator, and Donna, our producer. I'm so blessed to work with these amazing women who get the episodes out each week. Be sure and subscribe and share and leave a 5-star rating and review. That's the best thanks you can give our team. It helps get the word out about the podcast. I'll see you next time on the Modern Motherhood Podcast.